Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I have a not really review, kind of review, as full of a review as I can do at the moment on this knife to do for you today. This is the Spyderco Slysz Bowie. I've been instructed by enough people now that I believe it, that the Slysz Bowie, or any of the Slysz knives from Spyderco, are actually called Swysz. It's in another language. How was I supposed to know? The way that it's spelt is Slysz. Anyways, apparently it's Swysz is the way that you're supposed to say it. Marcin Swysz is the designer of the Slysz Bowie. Best I can understand on this knife, to kind of encapsulate where it's at right now, is that this knife, when it first came out, was unpopular. They sat on shelves for a little while. They were fairly expensive, especially at the time for Spyderco pricing and in their catalog and kind of the space that they operated in. And they weren't very well received. Some people liked them, certainly. I'm not saying they were hated, not saying they were like made fun of. They just weren't like a front runner, right? And after they'd been out for a while, Nick Shabazz, who is a fantastic knife reviewer. If you somehow haven't heard of Nick Shabazz and you're watching one of my videos, that would be very interesting to me. Let me know if that's happened somehow. When he did his review of it, he said it was one of his favorite knives. It was a very positive review, and after that, the popularity kind of skyrocketed. But that, I don't know if it was before or like right around the same time or after. It was somewhere around the time that the knife was discontinued. They stopped making it, right? And they sold out. They haven't come back because they were discontinued. And ever since that time, they've gone from, when that happened, selling for retail, to now being absurdly expensive. I'm borrowing this knife from somebody who I met in the Millie Club. And he was really nice and generous and asked if I'd ever checked one out and if I'd like to borrow it, and said he was planning on selling it, but he'd like me to review it first. And I said, sweet. And I said, maybe I'll even buy it, because I have been really curious about this knife for a long time, and I've thought that I wanted one for a really long time. And I've come to find out I do kind of want one. We're going to talk about how I got here through the process of this, but I kind of want one. But I don't over-retail want one. That's the reality. These go for like $500 to $600 these days, a lot of the time, from what I observe. I don't want one nearly that bad. Not even close. I don't think this is even close to enough knife for me to be that expensive. And I think a lot of the people who really love this knife, especially if they've had it for years since they got it for that price, they can probably be pretty honest that it's not worth this shouldn't be an over $500 knife based on what it's made of and how it's put together. But I've heard other people defend all day long that they think it is worth that. And I'm not going to say they're wrong either. I can just say where I've gotten to on it. So let me add this as well. I have not carried this knife. I have not cut with this knife. This knife has sat on the bubble wrap it came to me in on my desk. And when I've been at my desk, I've played with it. I've fidgeted with it. I've held it in my hand. I've done a couple little twirly twirls with it because I do that with all my knives. I've hung out with this knife, but I haven't put it in my pocket other than once to slide it in and slide it out to see how it kind of felt in pocket a little bit. But there's only so much you can tell from that compared to actually having it in your pocket for a day or a week. So my experience with it is pretty limited, right? That said, however, as much as I always want to be careful that I'm not overselling my experience with a knife, and I want to be transparent about how much I've used it so that you can understand how I came to the conclusions that I did, and trust that if I say a knife performs well in cutting, it's because I actually cut with it and I liked how it performed. All of that said, I do also, at this point, I've held a lot of knives. I'm constantly handling a lot of knives and talking about a lot of knives, and when I'm with other people who are into knives, I'm holding their knives, and I feel like I get a pretty good read on knives relatively quickly most of the time at this point. I still get some surprises. I still like to honor my process of doing an unboxing and then a first impressions after I've carried it about a day, and then a full review after I've carried it a good handful of times over the course of at least a week, and I've cut with it and I've used it, and like that's important to me because I do learn things through that process. But I also, I don't feel like I don't get this knife after it being on my desk for a couple of weeks now and me just playing with it quite a bit. I feel like I've got a pretty good read on it. So let's discuss. This knife is nice. It is a very nice Spyderco. The Slysz Bowie is fairly simple in its construction. We have titanium, which is nice and contoured. It's a really good, smooth titanium scale. You can see it's been stonewashed. I've heard that these pick up snail trails really easily, so that's part of why I haven't even wanted to put it in my pocket at all. This is a like new in box example, and it hasn't been carried as far as I know. I wasn't going to be the one to carry it, right? Especially if he's planning on selling it. So, stonewashed titanium, contoured again over here. Real simple frame lock, no insert or anything. Nice simple wire pocket clip. And then we have a blade in XHP with a kind of clip point, Bowie style, of course, being the Slysz Bowie. And you can see it has been stonewashed, but before they stonewashed it, it was mirror finished. So they do that same finishing at Spyderco on a couple of knives. The only one that I've owned personally that has had that, I think, would be the Drunken. Oh, there's got to be more than that. I've had I think they do that on the Paysan, unless I'm crazy. I don't remember now off the top of my head. I had for a moment a Positron, which is in my opinion the worst Spyderco that's ever been built. I think they did that on the Positron, which is hilarious. Yeah, I've had it on a few knives, I guess, but I really like the finish. I think it looks great. But I also don't see it as being like a good user finish. Anything that's that shiny just tends to pick up scratches in my experience. But yeah, it's a good looking blade. This is of course made in the Taichung, Taiwan factory from Spyderco. So it is an overseas built knife. It runs on washers and it feels like it. A lot of people, I've heard so many expressions about this knife over time from people trying to explain to the poor people who can't afford it what it's really like. And I've heard several people say it's kind of like the Sebenza as made by Spyderco. I can see that, as it's like a nice smooth hydraulic slow roll, and it's not drop shutty at all, but it's smooth the whole way through. It's glassy, right? You hear those terms thrown around. And in those ways, I do think, yes, it is kind of like a Chris Reeve. I could see some similarities there, and maybe that's why it doesn't super vibe with me, because those things about Chris Reeve knives, those things that a lot of people consider the strengths of the model, are things I consider weaknesses of it. I prefer drop shutty action. I prefer a deployment that I find fun. You can watch those videos of like Chris Reeve's Sebenza 21 carry challenge if you want to see how I really got there on that. But yeah. So this knife, let's talk ergos, action, carry, and then I can't talk about cutting because I haven't cut with it, but I can speculate on how I think it would cut, I guess. Ergonomically, it's comfortable for me. It's not like an absolute dream in my hand, but it's very good. There's no hot spots anywhere. A lot of the edges are really smoothed out. I like that the spine of the knife is crowned. The jimping is super unaggressive. It doesn't bother my thumb at all. I like that jimping there. It's the right size for my hand. Feels very comfortable. It fills my hand without feeling huge. The contouring on the titanium feels good. Everything just feels very smooth. It's like a polished river stone that's just been polished by nature for millennia. It's like it's really smooth everywhere, and I like that about it. The backspacer, I think on here is G10, if I'm not crazy. And it has a little bit of jimping on it in a couple of spots. That jimping to me actually feels pretty good in a reverse grip. Got a little bit of jimping here for my thumb, and that feels nice. Back here, I guess I just feel it kind of passively in my palm. Doesn't bother me. That jimping is fine. So all of the jimping on here is okay with me. Lock bar access is actually really good as well. I don't know if that totally fits in with Ergos, but I thought of it because there's that cutout there. And some people might be bothered by cutouts like that, or by this cutout specifically on here. For me, it doesn't really bother my hand. I think the knife might be slightly more comfortable if it didn't have that, but I have to really like think about it to even notice that it's there. It's not ruining the ergos for me at all. So yeah, it's great in a reverse grip. It's good in a hammer grip. It's good in a saber grip. It's good in a draw cut. Reverse grip draw cut is good. What's interesting to me is it's actually, I think my favorite grip on it might be a reverse grip. This feels really comfortable to me, and I wasn't expecting that out of this knife, so that's kind of cool. But ergonomically, it's a win. Carry, like I said, all I did was slip it in a pocket once. So I know that it went in and out of that pocket very smoothly. No surprise at all, because it is a smooth body knife with this very smooth titanium, and it's a wire deep carry style pocket clip from Spyderco. I know how all of that performs in theory, and having used it on other knives, right? And so it's very smooth in and out of the pocket. Because of how smooth it is all over, I imagine it's going to be very smooth all day. The knife feels fairly lightweight to me, even though there's no internal milling or anything. I am pretty impressed that it's as light as it seems to me. Maybe that's because it just it has kind of a commanding profile, and it seems relatively large, and so maybe I just in my head think it's going to be heavier than it is. That's one of those things that's hard to explain, right? Like some knives, when I look at them, I expect them to be a certain weight, and that's probably based on all the knowledge I have of knives that I have that are similar to them and haven't picked them up and all that. But like my Koenig Arius, every time I pick it up, feels lighter than I'm expecting it to be. The Chris Reeve Sabenza, every time I picked it up while I had it, it felt heavier than I was expecting it to be. This feels a little lighter. Not a ton lighter than I expect it to be, but just a little. Especially when it's kind of open and in hand. It just feels, it has a good neutral weight to it. So yeah, in pocket, I imagine it's pretty good. Based on the very quick in and out of pocket that I did, it was convenient and comfortable. So that's all good. Let's talk about action. And I think this is going to kind of be the big one on where it falls short a little bit for me. Not necessarily short of the retail price, but short of how much how much people are asking for them these days. With the thumb, obviously this is a hole. It's a Spyderco, right? This is not a thumb stud knife. It is a hole knife. Holes are greater than studs in my opinion. I prefer holes to studs. This one, if I don't get it right, I fail deployment. The way that the cutout is done for the hole, it's just not very good hole access in my opinion. Like half the time that I try to deploy it, I'm running into the scale. So I have to position the knife on a little bit more of an angle than I normally do, and then fling instead of kind of straight up, kind of out to the side a little bit. And it's like I can get used to it. I can get it right, but I find myself inadvertently using wrist a lot of the time to make sure that I get it. And I don't like using wrist on knives. I feel like that's a very 90s thing to do. There is a sea of knives available right now that you do not have to use your wrist to get to deploy perfectly. It's antiquated to have to use your wrist to deploy a knife. And on this one, it just, with my thumb, I don't like deploying it. It's better if you are into slow rolling knives, then you'll never mess that up, sure. But I'm not into slow rolling knives. And then the whole access, because the lock bar covers half of it, is not good on the backside for Spidey flicking. I can do it. Oh, come on. Even then, it's not ideal. I can get it. And it's not that I dislike a challenge of figuring out a new knife and getting it down, but the more I've played with this, the less I've been interested in trying to get it down. Even when I get it just right, it's just not one of the most fun actions I've ever felt. It's just not. And I don't know. I don't like Spidey flicking it. I don't like thumb flicking it. And those are my two options. So I think where the following for this knife is, and where all the people who are so into it differ from me is that they just prefer a different type of action, and that's fair. But this is not an action that I like. I just don't. It's glassy, it's smooth, it's those Chris Reeve things that people love. I don't love those things. I would rather have a knife on bearings that deploys crisp, right? And then also drops shut nice and easily. That's more fun to me. I have way more fun with knives that perform that way than knives that feel best when you slow roll them. Like, I'm not a slow roller kind of guy. Maybe when I'm 80. Not to throw shade at people who are into that. You're allowed to like that. But that's not for me. So, yeah. And then the last category, I guess, would be cutting performance. Now, like I said, I haven't cut a single thing with this knife, and I'm not gonna. It's not my place to do that. So I can only speak from like what I would expect to be the case with this blade. Now, this is a full flat ground, fantastic profile. I love the shape of the blade. I love the crown spine. I like the tip. It's got a great tip on it. I like that you've got nice gradual belly all throughout. It's a good, usable blade shape from everything I can tell, and it does get to a nice thinness behind the edge. This, as an EDC blade goes, seems to me like it would do great. XHP is a pretty good steel. I think that's great about it. I would be worried about using it so much because of the finish on it, to be totally honest, just because it is this really beautiful mirrored stone wash. I would be reluctant to actually cut things with it. Honestly, I would. But I think if I were to cut things with it, it would perform well. So I think it's a good blade. I think the blade and the ergos, like when this knife is in hand, it does feel like it would make a pretty good user. But pretty good user at the retail price. Like, if this knife was $300 right now, I might buy one. I probably would, but I doubt I would keep it. Like, I'd probably want it for a little while, I'd have some fun with it, and then I'd sell it to buy something else. If I'm really trying to think of, like, if I had got this knife for $300, I just doubt I'd keep it for very long. And at $500 to $600, I'm out. I don't want this knife at that much money. Like, there are just so many other way more compelling knives. Let me show my... Where is it? I don't know where I put it. Oh, there it is. This is my CKF Satori 2.0. This knife, I'm in secondary pricing for as much or less than I could get one of those Slysz Bowies for. And this is an integral on bearings. It's a flipper, and it has a fuller that I can middle finger flick. It feels, to me, like so much more knife for my money in terms of value. It does all the things that I want out of a knife. The materials objectively are nicer. M390 is a better performance steel than XHP, I'll say with confidence, at least for what I prefer in steels. There's always somebody who's going to, you're wrong. But I like M390 better than XHP. I think this action is 1,000,000 times better than the action on the Slysz Bowie. It's not a mirror finished blade, sure, but I think the finishing on this blade is gorgeous. So I just, at the price that they demand right now, I have zero interest in them now, which is a really good thing that I got lucky and I was able to borrow one to find that out. I suppose what probably would have happened if I bought one, right? If I had shelled out, say, $550 for one of these, I would have just, as soon as I finished reviewing it, I would have sold it for every dollar I had into it. That's the good thing about the value being high and seemingly staying high, is that you can get out of it if you get into it. But I'd rather not play that game by just borrowing this and finding that out. So I'm glad I got to do that. Now, let me reiterate. The reasons why this knife isn't worth the money to me you might feel totally different about those types of things. If you asked me, would I rather pay $500 for this or $500 for a Sebenza, I'd pick this. I like this better than a Sebenza, but I don't like the Sebenza. That's not a fair comparison, right? That's another knife that I don't think is worth a lot of money to me for my preferences. But I can't tell people they're wrong for wanting to spend that much on one. If that's what they like in a knife, do it. Great. That, like, you're allowed to have your own preferences. And I can see the allure of this knife. I've wanted one for a long time. And so I just don't really so much anymore. But keep all of my preferences in mind, whether you're deciding for yourself to want one or not. And let's hope that the rumors are true, that maybe there will be more of these somewhere down the line. That would be great to see. Because at retail, I get interested again, right? That's the truth. So there you have it. That'll be my full review-ish thing. Not based on carry and use, but me pontificating about the Spyderco Slysz Bowie. So thanks for checking it out, guys. Appreciate it as always, and I will see you on the next one.